Do you ever feel like you're the only one reading your school newsletter? Well, Smore is here to help you change that. Built for educators, Smore gives you hundreds of easy to use templates to craft newsletters your community will love and that they'll actually read. You can add videos, images, polls, and more. Stop guessing about what content your community wants to read. Use Smore's analytics to see who opens your emails and which links are getting clicked. And did I mention, Smore lets you translate your newsletter into more than 100 different languages. I'm telling you, this is the platform that you want to use. Sign up now and take $50 off your first year of your Smore plan. Make your newsletters easier and more engaging at smore.com/teachbetter. Again, that's smore.com/teachbetter. Hey, Leading into Leadership listeners, it's Darren here, and I've got something really exciting to share with you. I've been working on something that I know is going to be a game changer for so many of you out there, especially if you're an early career principal or a school leader who's just feeling overwhelmed, unsure of where to focus your time, and just needing a little bit of clarity. I've spent years coaching school leaders and speaking at conferences across the country, and one of the biggest challenges I hear all the time is this. How do I prioritize my leadership actions when I get constantly pulled in 100 different directions? Now, if that sounds like you, I've got some great news. I am launching a brand new digital course designed specifically to help early career school leaders take control of their time, focus on what truly matters, and lead with clarity and purpose. In this course, Take Control of Your Leadership, a Road to Awesome map for early career leaders, will give you the tools and strategies to overcome overwhelm and set you up for long-term success. And here's where it gets really exciting. We are officially in pre-launch mode. You'll have a chance to get early access. I'll be releasing more details over the next few weeks, but here's what you need to know right now. Get over to roadtoawesome.net and sign up for our mailing list. As a subscriber, you'll get exclusive early bird pricing, plus some extra bonuses that I'll be sharing really soon, and you don't want to miss that. In the meantime, keep tuning in to the Leaning into Leadership podcast because I'll continue to be sharing more tips, strategies, and course updates in the coming weeks. I can't wait to take this journey with you and to help you lean into your leadership in an even bigger way. Now, thank you for listening. Let's get to today's episode. All right, my friends, welcome into episode 168 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. You know, this is the time of year where more than likely you are leaning into the development and finalizing of your school improvement plans. And if that's the case, man, you have picked the right episode to jump into. My guest on the show today is Dr. Matthew Courtney. And Dr. Courtney is not only a passionate advocate for education, he's a specialist in evidence-informed school improvement. And he began his career as a music educator, but then moved on into some leadership roles in nonprofit, higher education, and in state government. And Dr. Courtney is a published researcher who focuses specifically on school improvement. He advises schools on leveraging evidence-based decision-making to accelerate student achievement and to ensure that your school improvement plan has its best chance for success. Dr. Courtney and I sat down and had a fantastic conversation about this. I know you're going to love it, so let's get right to it with Dr. Matthew Courtney. At one point in time in my career, one of the responsibilities I had as a building level leader was the assistant principal in charge of curriculum, instruction, and special programs. And that was a really fancy way of saying anything that happened related to instruction was my responsibility. Included in that was our efforts in school improvement. And I found quite often that school improvement could be a really interesting challenge, especially early in my career. How do you go about doing that work? Where do you put your efforts? And what is the evidence that you're looking for along the way? Well, my guest on the show today, Dr. Matthew Courtney, is an expert in just that, evidence-based improvement in our schools. And we're going to have a really great conversation about that type of work, along with a whole lot of other things. But before we get to that, Matthew, welcome into the Leaning into Leadership podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Darren. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Matthew, let's just do this really quick, just to help orient our listeners to who you are and what type of work you do. Maybe let's take them on a little journey. You share with them whatever it is you'd like to share to kind of give them some background and some understanding of who Dr. Matthew Courtney is.
Yeah. So I started my career as an elementary general music teacher, teaching those little ones how to sing and dance and play different instruments. It was a really fun time in my life, but a time in my life full of learning, like most of us in our early careers. And for me, one of the biggest challenges I faced as a classroom teacher was actually my pencil sharpener and the sort of classroom management instructional challenges that came with that pencil sharpener. Every 30 minutes, a new group of kids, a new group of sharpened pencils, and a pencil sharpener that never seemed to work and always burned out and made lots of grinding noises while I'm trying to teach beautiful, artful music. And it really was just keeping me up at night. It was the number one challenge in my life until one day in a workshop, one of our trainers passed out a research article where a group of English teachers had swapped pencils for ink pens out when teaching kids how to write. And this researcher had found that when they did that, these students were writing more and therefore better prose over time. And the English teachers never went back. They kept using ink pens forever. And I thought, okay, well, maybe that's how I finally defeat the pencil sharpener. And so I swapped my pencils out for ink pens, and it changed my whole classroom really in an instant. And in that moment, I like to say that's when I became an evidence empowered educator. In that moment, I realized the power that research and evidence can have to help us solve even the most mundane problems in our classroom. And so I really put my nose to the grindstone and went in that direction to be the best educator that I could be, and then eventually moving out of the classroom to try to be the best researcher I could be, and then the best leader that I can be. I've led evidence-based initiatives, of course, from my classroom, but also in the nonprofit sector, in teacher preparation, and in state government as well. So I've had a lot of unique opportunities to apply evidence to different problems. And today I'm a consultant and I work with schools and districts, helping them install systems that allow them to use evidence to solve problems in their schools and classrooms in real time.
Oh, that's exciting work right there. So I love the story there. Actually, you hadn't shared that with me before. So certainly lessons learned from a pencil sharpener is
Mm.
something that is really really powerful. Really making me think a lot on that. I'm curious. Let's maybe talk just a little bit more about just that work specifically as it connects to school improvement.
Mm.
When you first started to make that move into being just that much more driven by evidence based and research based work, what were some of the things you found along the way that maybe school leaders should be thinking about related to what type of evidence, what type of research they should be looking at?
Yeah, so I think when we think about research, we have this sort of gap in our field where we're not very well trained to use research and think about research in a deep and meaningful way. Um, we might be effective consumers of research, but we're not always very good curators of research, and we're not always trained to be creators of research. And so there's this sort of this sort of gulf in our field that keeps these two parts of our profession, practice and research, really apart. And so, as I've done this work, I think the key element to being successful is really identifying those root causes of problems and challenges that you have, and then going out with an open mind to try and find research that addresses those root causes from a variety of perspectives. I always say that a true evidence-based decision isn't just rooted in the research, it's rooted in all of the knowledge that you have access to. And so we pull that research in and we take all these different perspectives, but then we apply our local knowledge, our practitioner knowledge, our contextual knowledge to really choose the best solution for our kids at our school in that moment.
So let's take that a little bit deeper. I like where you're going with that, and you're talking about the research piece. How do leaders really incorporate that research into their decision making process? How do they
Mhm.
take that from we're now maybe getting better at curating the research as you
Mhm.
talked, but now we need to incorporate it into the decision making processes that are happening in our classrooms and in our school offices.
So I think the more that we can embed the research work into just sort of how we do things, the better success we're going to have with this effort. A lot of times, research use is layered on top of other stuff. It becomes an extra thing that leaders have to do, that PLCs have to do, that teachers have to do. But the more we can think about building permanent systems and really installing those thoughtful systems into our processes, the more success we're going to have. One great way, I think, to sort of start that process, if you've got kind of a research hesitant faculty or someone, school maybe just dipping their toes into this area, is to create a volunteer research committee, kind of like a PLC at the building level, where you solicit volunteers to come in and they review the research together. That way, no one person has to do all of the work and all the heavy lifting. And then they meet once a month, once a quarter, depending on what you're working on. And they have those thoughtful professional conversations about the research that they're working with and what that's looking like and how that's working. I also love to embed research into the professional learning community environment. And so if you've got a PLC structure that's up and thriving and that's doing good work around maybe data analysis, around collaborative planning, adding a session into that routine where that team is also reviewing research related to maybe the concepts that they're teaching, the methods they're deploying, or a persistent problem of practice that they all share can be a great way to infuse research into the work and make it just how we do business here.
Yeah, I really like that. I think the more we can leverage our PLCs to take on what you're suggesting, essentially what you're talking about is a different form, or maybe not even a different form, maybe just a little bit different way of practicing professional learning. And
Mm,
certainly, when we talk about what a PLC is, I mean, professional and learning are the first two pieces of PLC.
yeah.
And it isn't just learning in the classroom. I mean, it should be learning as the adults. So as adults are doing this work, um, I would imagine you've probably gotten this little bit of pushback. So I want to kind of play this out a little bit, right? So I'm a principal, and we are taking on a little bit more work, more of this evidence-based work, more of this research-based work. And I've followed your lead. I've put in place in my school a committee that is designed to, you know, work through the research, identify things that fit our different PLCs best. We're asking our PLCs to maybe take on some of that work during that time. I would imagine I'm going to hear the pushback from at least a few people on my staff about, look, my plate is already full enough without having to do this work around reading research based articles and that type of thing. I'm already a professional. Why are you asking me to do this? So with that pushback, let's go there a little bit.
Yeah, Darren, I hear that pushback in every single school that I work with. Every keynote that I give, every workshop that I give, somebody says that to me. And the truth is, as a society, we have just piled teachers' plates higher and higher and higher with more and more things, and we very rarely take anything away. And so here's how I respond to that. This is a shift in the way that we think about how we do education. This is a shift in the way we think about the work that professionals do, right? When we think about other professionals like doctors and nurses and social workers, psychologists, this is work that they regularly engage in, that is embedded as a part of how they do work. And if we really are the professionals we say that we are, then we need to take a look at what's on our plate and ask ourselves, are these the things that professional educators should be doing? And so, as we add research on as a thing that professional educators should be doing, maybe there's some things that professional educators don't need to be doing. That as a leader, we need to take a careful look at and start cleaning that plate off a little bit and creating the space. We know in research utilization, there are three primary barriers for especially classroom teachers, but this applies usually to building leaders as well. And they're time, access, and training. They need protected time to do the work. They need increased access to the research, and they need the effective training to fill in the gaps that their traditional training that they may have received during their certification process may have left behind. And if we can conquer those three things, then we can create an environment where research use really thrives and becomes a natural and professional part of how we run our schools.
Yeah, I really like that. I have that conversation with leaders quite frequently about what is actually on the plate and
Mm.
what some different activities could be to help kind of uncover what's on the plate. I like what you talked about there. I would build on that with also saying that looking at some type of a protocol like start, stop,
Mm.
continue, and consider,
Mhm.
where the staff themselves have an opportunity to have a voice in, look, these are the things we need to stop doing. These are the things we need to start doing. This is what we should consider doing. This is what we should start doing. Oftentimes, what happens when you do that type of work, when you really dive into the plate, what we find is so many of our teachers are still hanging on to things that we've long since moved on from, but they
Mm.
still think they need to be doing this and they need to be doing this and they need to be doing this because by far and away, most of our teachers are pleasers. And if their administrator says, well, I really want to do this, they're going to jump in. They're going to say, yeah, I want to do that. I want to help them. I want to please them. And they're still carrying things around that probably should have let go of a long time ago. Is that an experience that you've had? Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great place for that sort of building level PLC to come into play. So I always like to kind of tier it into a school. So we start with the leader, get the leader on board, then we start with this selected group or volunteer group, then we push to PLC school wide, right? So we are building some momentum along the way. But a great activity for that building level, system level PLC is to really look at the plate and say, these are the things we're doing. Are these things evidence based? So maybe instead of a problem of practice, an individual one, maybe we run a protocol like the one you've described. And then from that, we say, well, these are the things we're clinging to. Should we be clinging to these things? Is there evidence that says these things are appropriate or useful or beneficial? And that could be locally derived evidence or research evidence, ideally a combination of both.
Yeah, no, I really like that, and I think what you just said there that's really resonating with me is not just looking at what's on the plate, but is what's on the plate actually research driven? And does it have some evidence based outcomes that are going to
Mm.
truly make the needle move? Or are these things that are on the plate just because we like them, right? Just because they look good on the plate?
Yeah.
Certainly, there that I have worked with, and I probably am guilty at some point in my career as a leader, have worked with those leaders that put things on the plate because they look good, right? Because they were the shiny object, and like, ooh, I really
Mm.
love this, right? I mean, let's just talk about the PLC itself, right? Um, when the PLC movement first began, um, there was a real purity to it, and the PLC
Yeah.
has evolved and evolved and evolved and evolved, and in some cases it's evolved in a very positive, strong way. In other ways, it has not evolved. I'll just say that. Talk maybe a little bit about that piece in particular, right? So everybody wants to PLC, and it's not really something you do. It should be something that you are. What do you see with the schools that you work with, and how do you help them work through, what is and is not the right type of work in that structure?
Yeah, this is a really common trap in education and in education leadership. And I think here's what I think happens is we have this idea, maybe we've chosen it because it's shiny and new and everybody else is doing it. I like to call that over the fence decision making. We peeked over the fence, they're doing it, I'm going to do
Yeah,
it too.
right.
Um,
Absolutely.
but
Gotta
it
keep
could
up with my
also
neighbor.
be, yeah, exactly. It could also be a thoughtful evidence-based decision. But what happens is over time, it becomes a compliance-oriented decision. Then there's a checklist, then there's a walkthrough tool, Then there's a form to complete at the end of the 8-week term. Then there's a whatever else, right? And it morphs in to fit in to whatever we're doing, and to fit into those sort of compliance oriented things, the sort of managerial things that we do as leaders in education. And then eventually we drift away from what the evidence says we should actually be doing. Another great example of this is learning targets on the board. So there is some evidence that talks about the benefit of sort of priming the students. This is what we're going to learn today. This is how you will know if you're successful. But what has happened with learning targets over the last really probably decade is they've become the sort of it thing. They started as this evidence-based thing, then they became popular and shiny, then they became required, then they became walkthroughs, then they became hyper specific. And so your school might use this structure or this formula. Your school might use this other formula. My brother is a third grade teacher. In his school, he has to have a primary statement and 3 bullets underneath his I can statement. And so that's a very specific structure, right? And there's really not research that says this structure is what we need to be doing. It's really all about the priming of the learning and the sort of mental preparation for the students. It's not at all about, are there 3 bullets and do they have semicolons at the end? Like that's not what the evidence says we should worry about. And so when I am in a situation where that's the kind of stuff that's happening, and we're saying, well, but we love our learning targets are important. Absolutely they are. But how much time and energy are you and your teacher spending writing learning targets, monitoring them, putting them on the board? I worked with a school that required learning targets to be handwritten on the board. They couldn't be like on the PowerPoint slide. They had to be handwritten on the board. So like if in my classroom, when I was teaching, if I had that rule, every 30 minutes, I'm rewriting a learning target. I'm doing that during a transition, which means I have a messier transition, which means actually I'm losing instructional time because I have to complete this task, right? So in that instance, maybe that system level PLC says, okay, the way we want learning targets, but we don't want these learning targets. Let's go back to the research. What does a learning target really have to have? What does it really need to look like in our environment? And let's not worry so much about compliance and check marks and rubrics for a learning target. Let's focus on the true essence and purpose of a learning target, and we'll focus our energy there instead.
Well, and I think that's the type of work. I'm glad that you went down the learning target road because that's another one that, certainly I've seen every iteration of what you're talking about. And whether or not that actually impacts the outcome of learning in a classroom or not is not just for debate, but there's certainly a lot of research around that. And you've just shared that. I think that it's an important piece. And my biggest takeaway from what you're sharing there and what I want to kind of pull together for everybody who's listening is think very deeply around where you are asking people to put their time when we're leaning our time into mundane tasks such as writing a learning target that has to be done a very specific way and be in a specific location. As I listened to you talk about that, I was taken back to my time as a principal, and certainly there was a big focus on learning targets from our district. And one of my very best teachers, the learning target was never written on the board. And this was an individual who taught at a very, very high level, did amazing work, but he did everything on the computer. And if his students were going to be there on the computer, he wanted his learning targets there where the students could see it. But our superintendent just could not wrap his head around that no, it needs to be here because that's what he heard in a workshop somewhere. Now, is that where we want to have our people putting our time? And the answer is no. So excellent piece right there on the learning targets and on what's on the plate, what we're doing in our PLCs. I really, really appreciate each and every thing that you just shared on that. And it's like I'm like deeply processing all of that again. Because I think it just comes back to this, and this is maybe the last thing I want to ask on this before we're already starting to burn through our time, and I've got to ask you the last question I ask here on the show. But before I do that, I want to maybe just kind of loop back to this, because I think it'll be a good way to maybe pull this all together.
Yeah.
As a school leader, as a district leader, when I'm thinking about evidence-based work, if you can find a way to capture this for us, what really is evidence? What really is it that we're looking for?
Mm.
And where can I choose as a school leader to hang my hat?
Mm. Yeah. So here's what I would say about that. Evidence in this context, I think, has three pillars. The first pillar is the research. We want to look and see what have independent researchers learned and told us about this thing, this problem, this situation, whatever. The second place we want to look is our own local evidence, our own data. What does our data tell us about this situation and this problem? How do we weave those two things together with our professional contextual knowledge? How do we put all that together to say, okay, now we have a solution? We're going to then put that into pillar three, which are continuous improvement systems. Things like plan, do, study, act cycles, participatory action research, or research practice partnerships, even something as simple as 30, 60, 90-day planning. How do we then take that, put it into this system, and then as the system runs, as we implement this thing, we are creating new local evidence that we can use to tweak and continue to improve. So evidence-based decision making is not, I read it in a book, so we're going to do it. I read it in a journal, so we're going to implement. That's not evidence-based decision making. That's not thoughtful decision making at all. What evidence-based decision making is pulling all of that knowledge together and then implementing it in such a way that we get new knowledge that we can continue to learn and grow from.
I love that so much. I think that's wow. That's just absolutely so solid. And the thing that really leaps off the page at me there is the importance of that local context. I love that. Don't just go to a conference and see or hear something and say, "Ooh, that's what we're going to come and bring in." I worked
Yeah.
for that person too. We had 13 initiatives going at one time. No kidding. I cannot make that up. 13 initiatives at once.
Yeah.
Don't just see it at a conference. Don't get distracted by the shiny. Make sure that fits your local context, and that ultimately you're connecting it to your local systems. Two of the three pillars you talked about right there, Matthew, tie into what is happening at the local level, which I think is just so super powerful. Add in that research. What does the evidence say? What does research say? And putting it all together, you really come up with something really spectacular. I love that. I know a lot of people are going to be thinking about that as they're starting to put together their school improvement work, as their school years have launched, as they're really getting moving forward. I love that so very much. But again, we're at that point in the show where I've got to ask you that question. I get to ask you that question that I ask everybody here on the show. So it's the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. So Matthew, how are you leaning into leadership right now?
Yeah, so one of my biggest frustrations with the research literature is that practitioner research voices are very underrepresented. We have so many doctors of education leading our classrooms, leading our schools, leading our systems, and their voices are not found in the research literature. So I'm leaning into leadership through what I call my Leaders Publish initiative. And this is a free program that I run to coach leaders to help them take their local innovations and study them, write about them, and publish in academic journals about their work. We have to shift the attention and the direction of our research conversations. We have to include those practitioner voices. And rather than sit back and talk about it and advocate for it, I've decided to just roll up my sleeves and make it happen. I'm on a mission to help 1,000 school and district leaders publish their first research paper. And I invite all of your listeners to join me in that cause. You can find me at matthewbcourtney.com and come be a part of that solution with me.
I think that's such an exciting piece right there. I'm so glad that you talked about that. Yes, so many educators out there who are so incredibly talented and are really doing great evidence-based work, and to have the opportunity to then get that work published in some type of an educational journal is very, very important. And it's honestly something that will truly help to add to the evidence in our profession, and it'll come right from our practitioners, which is, I think, my absolute favorite part of this. Man, this is so good. You mentioned to them where they can find you as far as getting to your website. Any other ways that they can get in touch with you? Any other places like on social media or whatever that people are going to want to check out Matthew Courtney?
Yeah, so I'm on basically all the social medias. My handle is the same. It's MB Courtney EDD at all the socials. And then again, my website is www.matthewbcourtney.com. And they can find all my contact information there. I would love to connect with your listeners and help them bring their innovations into the research sphere.
Outstanding stuff. Thank you so much, Dr. Courtney, for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, some awesome stuff there from Dr. Matthew Courtney. Make sure you get connected to Dr. Courtney by using links that are down there in the show notes. And now it's time for a pep talk. This week, I want to talk about those difficult, challenging situations that we all know we're going to face as school leaders. Earlier this week, I got a phone call from a good friend who's a school leader, and he was dealing with, let's just say, a difficult situation. And while I won't share the details of his specific situation, we all know that as the school or district leader, those challenging situations just kind of come with the job. Today, I want to share with you 3 strategies that can help you navigate your way through those challenging situations. I want to talk about core values, resilience, and time management. They will help you to stay focused. So let's begin with core values. Think of your core values as your compass. They're going to guide you through your decisions, especially when things are challenging. By staying aligned with your core values, you're able to make choices that truly reflect your school's mission, no matter what's happening around you. Next up is resilience. See, resilience is more than just bouncing back. It's about turning challenges into growth opportunities. When you approach tough situations with resilience, you're not just coping, you're finding ways to adapt, to thrive, to learn, and to grow. And finally, time management. Man, when things get hectic and when they get chaotic, time management helps you keep the main thing as the main thing. By prioritizing what matters and setting boundaries, you can protect your time and stay on track, even on the most challenging days. So these 3 elements, core values, resilience, and time management, can transform how you approach those difficult situations. If you're interested in learning more about these strategies, check out my latest blog post. I just wrote a blog on this exact topic. I'd love to hear how you stay focused in those tough times. Drop a comment on the blog post, share your thoughts, reach out, send me an email at darren@roadtoawesome.net. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me this week on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Have a Road to Awesome week.